Now I want to welcome our next couple speakers. We have Rachel Phillips, Gallatin History Museum's research director, and Charlotte Mills, former Gallatin County clerk and recorder, and they will be taking us on the search for Sammy Williams.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. It's great to have such a big crowd here today. So in the story of Sammy Williams, you probably read a little bit about the description of this talk in the program, but I'm going to start at the end of the story. This is a photo of a gravestone in the cemetery, the Meadowview Cemetery in Manhattan, Montana. And you probably can't read it, especially in the back, but the stone reads, "A female whose real name is unknown, but who has been for many years known as Sammy Williams. Died December 10th, 1908, age about 68 years." So in the early December 1908, there was a very well-liked, well-known cook in Manhattan, Montana, in western Gallatin County, who passed away. And the cook's name was Sammy Williams, and the townspeople, this individual, Sammy, cooked for a variety of ranches in the area in and around Manhattan. And after Sammy's death, the officials or his friends, there's lots of different versions of how the story went exactly, but it was discovered that Sammy was actually a woman, and for the past 18 years or so, everyone in the area had assumed Sammy was a man. Sammy had lived as a man in Manhattan, and nobody knew any different, apparently, until Sammy died. So the citizens of Manhattan were curious to understand more about Sammy's past. So they decided to contact some people in other parts of the country to see if they could figure out a little bit about where Sammy had originally come from. So one fact that I think quite a few people in the Manhattan area knew was that Sammy had spent time previously in Wisconsin. So there was a local Manhattan businessman. He was a jeweler, also a judge in town, named C.J. Odell. And so he wrote to the police chief in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, to see if, by chance, anyone in that area knew any information about this person named Sammy Williams. They did hear back, and the report that they received is what I will relate to you today about what they believed was Sammy's past and early life. It is hard to verify some of this, and that's what myself and some colleagues at the Gallatin History Museum in Bozeman have been trying to do, is verify as much of this as we can or disprove as much of it as we can. But the story I'll relate is the story that was passed on to the officials in Manhattan at the time of Sammy's death. So, go back a little bit. According to the report they received, Sammy Williams had been born Ingeborg Wieken, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, in Norway in the early 1830s. Sammy, and I could call her Ingeborg at this point, immigrated to the United States probably in the early 1850s as a family. And according to the report, the Ingeborg's fiance and his family came with them. And this group of Norwegian immigrants ended up settling in northeastern Iowa, Alamaki County. Again, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. So according to the story, Sammy and Ingeborg and her fiance were planning their marriage and looking forward to it when something happened. We don't know if it was the future mother-in-law broke off the engagement, or maybe it was her fiance himself. Whatever happened, apparently Ingeborg decided she wanted to leave the area and basically just disappeared. So Ingeborg ended up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and at that time apparently began going by the name of Billy Williams, and got some jobs in the area as a cook, and was apparently very well liked in that part of Wisconsin, and well known, and was very financially successful, and was able to purchase quite a bit of property in that area. And after some time, Billy Williams decided to move on to northern Wisconsin, where he worked as a cook in some of the logging camps in that area. And again, according to the story, Billy got along great with all the lumberjacks in camp, was very well liked and generous, and he was well known for providing funds to people he knew that were short on cash and helping sick friends recuperate. So had quite a good reputation in Wisconsin. Eventually, it sounds like someone in the area recognized Billy as being a member of this Norwegian family from Iowa, and word got back to Billy's family in Iowa that we think we saw your daughter in Wisconsin. And so according to the story, Ingeborg's / Billy's brother came up and tried to persuade Billy to return home, which didn't work. And Billy decided it was time, for whatever reason, he really did not want to go back home, and decided it was time to move on. So Billy moved further west to North Dakota, where he again appears to have worked as a cook on some ranches in North Dakota. At that time, this was probably 1880s, and the Northern Pacific had gone through North Dakota by that time, and there were quite a few large ranches that had been established near the railroad. I mean, that was a great way to ship the grain. So there were plenty of opportunities for being a cook on a ranch in North Dakota at that time. And the story is that Billy worked for a ranch called the Dalrymple Ranch, which I did look up a little bit about that individual, and that was a large ranch near Fargo for quite a few years in the 1880s, and so it's certainly plausible that Billy could have found work at that ranch. And it's also in North Dakota at this time that Billy started becoming known by the name of Sammy Williams instead of Billy. So another name change. I've also tried to look on census records to see what I could find about finding a Sammy Williams in North Dakota in the 1880s. I was able to find one reference to a Samuel Williams in Fargo in 1880, who was listed as a carpenter. So that's a little bit different occupation. Birthplace was listed as Wisconsin, and parents' birthplaces were listed as Ireland. It's hard to tell if this could be the Sammy Williams we're looking for or not, but more research into that will maybe give some more hints there. But after several years in North Dakota, Sammy again decided to move west and boarded the train and ended up in Manhattan, Montana, and stepped off the depot, like the one pictured here in Manhattan, and entered one of the local saloons and struck up a conversation with one of the ranchers in the area, a man by the name of Henry Hebe, who was one of those people that came to Montana during the gold rush in the 1860s and ended up establishing a farm in the Gallatin Valley, which was a big agricultural center during the gold rush, and was quite successful at farming and ranching in the Gallatin Valley. So had quite a bit of property by this time, which this would have been probably early 1890s is when we estimate that Sammy Williams made it to Manhattan. But Henry Hebe, in conversation with Sammy, I guess related that the cook on his ranch that prepared food for the ranch hands had recently left, and he was in need of someone to fill that position. So Sammy stepped in there and spent the next 18 years or so, 18 or 20 years that we're estimating, in and around Manhattan, cooking for various ranches in the area. This is a photo of the Meadowbrook Ranch, threshing on the Meadowbrook Ranch, which this is one of the ranches that Sammy was employed with, the Meadowbrook Ranch. This picture was taken about the time of Sammy's death, so this would have been a little bit later than when Sammy worked there. But again, it appears that Sammy got along great with everyone in the area and was well-liked, generous, and eventually, in 1908, Sammy's health began to decline, and the newspaper reports suggest that some friends urged him to see a doctor, which he kind of blew off. But then again, in early December, Sammy died, and there's many newspaper articles with similar titles to this, and that was the time period. They were, as you can imagine, very curious as to what went on at this time in 1908 to cause a woman to dress as a man and live so many years that way. There's different stories as to how Sammy's death occurred and how everyone discovered that this was a biological female, and one of them was that Sammy passed away of a heart attack while cooking one evening. Another was that some cowboys found Sammy dead in his bunk one morning after he failed to show up to cook breakfast. Another story suggests that some friends found Sammy's body and actually discovered that this wasn't a man, and decided that because Sammy had by this time was an owner of quite a bit of property in Gallatin County, that they should alert the authorities. And in any case, a coroner and an undertaker were brought in. Sammy's body was prepared for burial, and they didn't know anything more at this time about Sammy's history, but there was a small service at the cemetery in Manhattan. Friends pitched in and purchased the gravestone that I showed you earlier, and from there the townspeople started to investigate to see what they could find. This is Sammy Williams' death certificate, which was filed at the Clerk and Recorder's office, and you can see that it's probably very hard to read, but you have the name at the top, Samuel Williams. Someone has written underneath that female. They suggested the birthplace of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, probably because they didn't know anything else. They knew that Sammy came from that area. That's the best they could do at that time. The informant was Mr. Odell that I mentioned earlier of Manhattan, and they believe that Sammy died of heart disease. So there's a little bit of information on there, but my colleague Charlotte has come up with some other interesting evidence of Sammy in Gallatin County that we'll share with you.
Hi, can you hear me? I have a booming voice. Okay, as it was noted, I used to be the clerk and recorder and the election administrator in Gallatin County for 12 years. And so when I heard this story, it's like, oh, let me dig into this a little more. We have a volunteer, her name is Jody Boland, and she comes in once a week, and she and I got together and we started digging. Rachel said that in the newspaper that they had identified her as Ingeborg Vegan. And through some research, we actually found that in Norway, when people are born, if your dad's name is Amund and you are the son, your last name becomes Amund's son. If you're the daughter, it becomes Amund's daughter. The parents' last name were Olsen. And so we determined that that Ingeborg's last name came over with the Amundsen family. And so as we were looking through, we were able to find out several things. So I went over to the clerk and recorder's office, and the current clerk and recorder used to work for me, and so we started digging. And this is part of the fun, is being able to get in and figure out a few things. And as you saw on the death certificate, there was not much there, and it just said female. So in the Gallatin County Clerk and Recorder's Office, there is a book that they describe as the death register. And what it is an index of all of the death certificates. And handwritten in that book, you can see where the arrow is? There is a handwritten notation that says, masqueraded as a man for over 30 years successfully. Nobody, I don't think, in the office ever realized that. Okay? So then Rachel had gone through in preparing for a presentation a couple years ago and found, because we have all of these old books in our basement of our museum. So one of the things that I found was the probate book from 1908 that showed that Sammy Williams, and in big letters in parentheses it says female. And so the coroner had actually put all of her belongings into probate. So then we went into the voter registration books that we have, and it appears that she voted 3 times. She voted in 1894. It shows that her age is 60 years old, and that she was born in Wisconsin. It shows in the 1896 voter registration that magically her age is 53 now. I wish I knew how that worked. I would love to try it. Anyway, also that she was born in Wisconsin. And then 2 years later, in 1900, she voted again for the 3rd time. This time her age was 54, so she'd only aged 1 year since the 2 years before. This time it said she was born in Janesville, Illinois. The 3 common things in here is that she was working for the He branch at all 3 of those times. Now, if you guys, if you all remember, women couldn't vote. Until 1914, they were given the right to vote in state and local elections. And then in 1920, the 19th Amendment was voted in, where women could vote in federal elections. So here was a female who had not given the true age, had not given her true birth, had voted when women couldn't vote. And in today's world, that would be called voter fraud. Okay. All right. So Eric Semerod, the clerk and recorder, and I continued further because we knew that she had owned some property. So by going into some of the books in the recording area, we found the actual property that she owned. And she owned 320 acres, which is out on Norris Road, which is, I don't know if any of you are familiar, but if you go out of Bozeman, like you were going to go up to Big Sky, there's big 4 corners there. And if you go straight through, it's Norris, okay? And so my curiosity was, okay, did she homestead land when she couldn't homestead? So we actually got digging in there, and it turns out that she actually purchased the property, but she didn't purchase it by herself. She actually signed a contract in 1898 with the Northern Pacific, and she also, her partner in this name was Richard Jackson. So Richard Jackson and Sammy Williams signed the contract with the Northern Pacific Railroad to buy this property. And then in 1906, the railroad, Northern Pacific Railroad, actually recorded the deed in the Gallatin County Clerk and Recorder's office. And that deed does show Richard Jackson. So Jody trying to find who this Richard Jackson is, and the only thing that she could come up was that he was a farmhand around the Four Corners area where her property was. And so we found that the property was sold at a sheriff's sale after her death. So apparently nobody came to claim the property. It was sold at the sheriff's sale in 1909. There was a gentleman that bought it, but we cannot find what happened to the money that they got from there. So it was just kind of a little dead end from there. The one thing also that, going back to how she filled out these registers, as you can see, let me see, there is a thing right here. Right here in this register in 1896, this gentleman right here was actually born in Holland, right before her name. And you can see over here that he had to supply papers. And I'm assuming it's the papers that when they immigrated to the United States, then they came through Ellis Island and the other immigration ports that they were given. And so in order to vote, and it's all the way through all these registers, is that anybody who said their birthplace was outside of the United States, they had to show their records, their immigration records. So she probably was standing behind somebody in line waiting to vote, and when she heard that they needed these, she would not have had any papers, so she just told them that she was born in Wisconsin. So that's one more thing. She was not a citizen of the United. Well, she probably was, but she didn't have the paperwork to show it. And so it's been very, very interesting. So when the people on the headstone said that it was a female whose real name is not, is unknown, we're pretty confident that it in Ingeborg Amundsen, and that her family immigrated here, that she was born in 1833. So when she actually died, she wasn't 68, she was 75. And this is just a copy of the deed that was in the recording office. But Jody found this picture. So do you suppose that Sammy was cut out of the photo? And so maybe there really was, when she left, she really did not want to be found or actually come back. And so it's just been a really fun experience going through, trying to find all the records. Ancestry now is amazing, the things that you can find out. And when Jody would type in, like, Sammy Williams, it's actually listed in some of the Amundsen family's records as the daughter being Sammy Williams. So, okay. Thank you.